Well, hello, everybody. And on behalf of the board of directors and the Whatcom Community Foundation, we want to start this and bienvenido. We are pleased to offer this spotlight session, and we're honored with the presence of each and every one of you. This is just the first of 4 spotlight conversations as part of our ongoing commitment to assure that everyone who lives here thrives here. 2 quick notes about this session. We will be recording the session because several people who have an interest in it were not able to attend. So please be aware that we will be recording the session. Second, you'll notice that there's both a chat function and a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please, we will answer questions at the end of the session, but please post your questions via the Q&A function since we'll be drawing the questions that you have there. You can put those questions in whenever they come to you. You don't have to wait till the very end. And we encourage you, in fact, to list those questions as they occur to you. My name is Francisco Rios. I'm the former dean and professor emeriti of the College of Education at Western Washington University. My pronoun preferences are he, him, his, and él. We want to provide a land acknowledgement, and we do so by using the template provided by the Lummi Nation and adapted herein. So we all acknowledge that we're residing on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, and other Coast Salish peoples. The Lummi, Nooksack, and other Coast Salish peoples are the original inhabitants of Washington's northernmost coast and southern British Columbia. They lived in villages throughout this territory and continue to have an ongoing relationship with these areas. Since time immemorial, they have celebrated life on their land, waterways, and on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of their people to perpetuate their way of life. Please join us in taking a moment of silence as we honor their ancestors and as we acknowledge the past, present, and future Coast Salish peoples as the original inhabitants of this land. My work has spanned 4 decades working with youth in one capacity or another, as a teacher, a mentor, and a community organizer primarily. As an educator, I came to understand how difficult and complicated learning is, as it's impacted by so many variables. One of the most important of these variables is the overall mental health of students in classrooms. In the last 2 decades, schools have placed greater attention to student mental, social, and emotional health as both a factor that may challenge teaching and learning, but also as an area for curricular focus for teaching and learning. That is, teachers bringing these topics up in classrooms for discussion to begin to destigmatize student mental health issues, but also to provide space to talk about what students may be experiencing. Additionally, as an educator and professor with an interest in diversity, we also know the intersection between student mental health and, in particular, the higher incidence of that in ethnic minorities communities, and as well for students from gender diverse backgrounds. These demonstrate that things like homophobia and anti-Black racism, for example, are social political factors negatively impacting the mental health and well-being of students of color. With this in mind, I am pleased to introduce the Executive Director of the Whatcom Community Foundation, Mari Ingram, who exemplifies in her work every day our common commitment to forging healthy communities. Mari will serve as our moderator for today's Spotlight conversation with experts from our local community. Mari, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Francisco, and welcome everybody. I also want to thank our neighbors at United Way for lending us some technical expertise behind the scenes today. We're very grateful for that. Before we get into the meat of our program, I want to just provide a little reminder of some housekeeping activities. So next slide, please. Just a reminder that we have both a chat function and a Q&A function. So if you want to pose a question for a panelist, please put that only in the Q&A. That's the thing that we're going to be monitoring. And then, of course, any chat comments as well. Also, All the registrants will receive a link to the recording that we're making of today. Please feel free to forward that. We know a number of folks weren't able to join us today because of the time and the short notice. And then, of course, we want to ask everybody to keep their comments respectful. So with that, I just want to remind us all the way back into 2019, when we were already awash in information. And now that in the middle of the pandemic, it's become truly overwhelming. So one of the things that we did at the onset of the pandemic was work with our partners at the Whatcom Center for Philanthropy, United Way, and the Chuckanut Health Foundation to identify some issues that were already present in the community, already big community challenges, but we were concerned were going to be made worse by the pandemic. So we've sent out a link to those in the invitation that you received, and we'll send that out in the resources that we follow up with as well. That's the reason that today we wanted to spotlight the first of 4 issues, as Francisco said. We know that everybody in the community is doing their very best to track, understand, adapt, and properly resource all of these challenges in the community. And at the same time, that's a Herculean task. So in addition to youth mental health that we're touching on today, we're going to be following up with briefings on domestic violence and sexual assault, seniors and caregivers, and then finally, food insecurity. So we hope you'll join us for the entire series. I want to echo Francisco's appreciation for our panelists today. They're taking time out of already over busy schedules. We're really grateful for you making time in your day, and not only to be here, but also the preparation that we know is involved, even though your expertise in your field is sort of like falling off a log. We really appreciate the fact that you're here to help us better understand what we can do as members of the community in a lot of different roles to better support youth in our lives directly, and also to support you and the organizations that you represent. So today we have with us Joe Fuller, who is a program specialist with the Whatcom County Health Department, Christy Sleddy, who's the executive director of the Whatcom Family and Community Network, and Lindsay Anderson, who is a kindergarten through 5th grade mental health therapist in the Nooksack School District. These 3 people alone, I think I can genuinely say that it is humbling to know all that they have been able to continue to accomplish despite ever-changing circumstances, extraordinary workloads, and added stress. And we're grateful for that. And I also want to take a moment to call out the fact that we see this across the entire nonprofit sector, as well as the public sector, people stepping up, doing more, sadly doing more often with less, and just trying to figure out how to stretch their human resource under truly extraordinary circumstances. So we're grateful to all of you and to your colleagues across the community. So our panelists are going to share some data and some insights today, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. And as you know, our time is limited, so we'll get through as many questions as we can. And we will also be following up with some resources for you as well. So finally, I've asked each of our panelists just to share a little bit about themselves the first time they start speaking. So you'll get to hear a little bit about them from each of them. And with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us some context for the status of youth mental health in Whatcom County. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation on this really important topic. I am a program specialist with the health department, but I am also a parent with 2 kids, so I come wearing that hat as well. I've got 1 kiddo in elementary school and 1 in middle school. So the past couple of years has certainly been a challenge. My daughter, she is now in her 2nd year of middle school, but her 1st year of middle school was really experienced from her bedroom. So definitely a really important transition time. In a challenging way to do that. And my little guy also had a year of at-home instruction. So certainly a lot of challenges. I think we just need to acknowledge that. Next slide, please. So really just, I think it'd be helpful to go back to some of the data that we had pre-pandemic. And so what we're looking at here is data from our Healthy Youth Survey 2018 results. We take the Healthy Youth Survey in Whatcom County every 2 years. And rather than put a whole bunch of charts looking at some of the older data, I thought I'd put just a couple of charts really to kind of ground us and give us some context moving forward. So if you can visualize yourself being a teacher in a classroom in Whatcom County that's full of about 30 students, 10th grade students. This is what mental health looked like in that classroom before the pandemic started. So we looked and saw about 20 that were dealing with anxiety, 12 dealing with depression, although this is not clinical depression, 7 contemplated suicide, 5 made a suicide plan, and 2 have attempted suicide. So what we saw is we've already saw needs in the community before the pandemic started. Over the last 5 years, maybe 7 years, we've seen rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking trending upwards. Next slide, please. We also saw disparities within the data that we were able to collect. So what we're looking at here is, again, 10th grade, we're looking at depression by ethnicity. So you can see certain students within our community were experiencing higher rates of depression. You can see our American Indian Alaska Native at 66% compared to 36%. Next slide, please. And also looking at contemplation of suicide by sexual orientation. So not just race, but sexual orientation certainly playing a big part in having poor mental health within our community. So you can see while 13% reported contemplation of suicide among our heterosexual students, those reporting to be either gay, lesbian, or bisexual significantly higher. So these are just a few slides that I wanted to share, really just kind of recapping some of the challenges that we had before the pandemic even started. Looking at disparities within all of these populations are something that we do on a continual basis. And before we move to the next slide, I just want to let you know that if you want to access any of our previous Healthy Youth Survey slides, you can find that online at askhys.net. So ask.hys.net. And you can correlate data. If you'd like more, I will certainly make sure that I put my email in the chat box at the end for you guys to access. So during the pandemic, I'm not going to share a lot of data around the pandemic. I'm just going to talk about it a little bit. Some of the challenges, concerns, and needs that we've seen. Certainly, it's not a surprise, isolation from peers. Youth really missed a lot of opportunities that they normally had. Lack of their support network for their social, emotional, and behavioral needs. Their referral system for supports. So not being at school meant less to no interaction with folks that they might normally see every day. Bus driver, school lunch worker, paraprofessionals, and even teachers really struggled during remote learning. Some students decided that they were going to have their screens off, which it's already really tough engaging in a virtual platform, but when you have your screen off, it's really hard to identify any concerns that teachers might have in being able to reach out. Some kids may not have wanted to share their home. Maybe their home wasn't safe. And I think there are some kids in our community that when I talk to counselors and I ask, oh, Friday, we've got a training, would you like to participate? They might say, no, I need all the time I have because a holiday weekend's coming up. And when kids come back, just even a 3-day weekend can be really challenging for certain kids, you know, abuse in the home and other things that might be happening. So a lot of challenges, but even when we transition back to in-person safety protocols, less interaction with staff due to distancing and masking, other natural triggers for referral to resources, dropping grades, discipline problems, attendance issues, all previously would have been trigger points for reaching out to other professionals to get some help. And last year with remote learning and how schools even looked at grades changed quite a bit. So we were missing that whole referral support network that the schools offer. So how did these change during COVID? I want to mention that in March of 2021, the state administered what they refer to as the COVID student survey. After I'm all done, I'll make sure I put a link so that you can access the full results to that. Unfortunately, we can't compare the data that we collected from this survey to our Healthy Youth Survey. It's collected through a different method. And there's also some high-risk students may just have not participated since it was virtually collected. But I just want to tell you a few highlights from that. So there was more anxiety and depression. Of those surveyed, 58% of high school students and 45% of middle school students reported feeling sad or depressed on most days during the past year. So if you click into the link after I provide it, you'll be able to see what they worried about, what was COVID related, what was related to schoolwork, relationships, things of that nature. Other findings from that, on a positive note, less substance use. Students reported lower levels of cigarette, e-cigarette, alcohol, and marijuana use during the pandemic compared to data collected from pre-pandemic state sources. And for those of you that may work in prevention, we know that there were decreased opportunities. Youth tend to use in social settings, and they just were not gathering the same way. So we're hoping as kids start coming back together that we don't see a bounce back effect from that. Another bright spot, I guess, from the results, less impact of bullying. 10th graders reported that 30-day use of bullying went down. I think being at home or having limited interactions reduced the opportunity for bullying. So there were a few bright spots, I think, within that survey, but certainly a lot of concerns on the mental health front. And really the overall takeaway, I think, during the pandemic is there was no one general experience. It was very situational. And those who had resources, support systems, and access to services had quite a bit different experience than those who did not. So one of the things that I'll make sure I put in the chat box later, there is a COVID-19 community health impact assessment. I think this report, there's many layers to the COVID impact. In the impact assessment unpacks a lot of areas around behavioral health, not only that, but housing and homelessness, childcare, kindergarten readiness, in other important areas. So we'll make that available. I encourage you to look through that. And again, it dives a little bit deeper into several of those layers. Next slide, please. So the one slide that I did want to share from the COVID student survey was this particular one, because one of the things that we're experiencing, not only locally, but statewide, is the workforce shortage in the mental health sector. There's a lot of positions out there that just are not being filled. There's a lot of need. There's a lot of wait times for people that are wanting to get in for professional help for assessments. But I thought this was a perfect slide to say, yes, mental health therapists are important. Lindsay will be talking in a little bit, and the work that she does is fantastic. We could use more of her. But there's a lot of other things that we should be doing. So in prevention, we tend to think of things in 4 domains: youth, family, school, and community domains. And so there is no silver bullet in terms of doing this work, but there is silver buckshot. If we're doing strategies in each of these domains, we're going to see some impact. And so this is really good opportunity to look and see, where do youth turn to for help? You can see a high percentage peers, almost half turn to their parents. But from there on, you can just see there's a variety, anything from teachers down to coaches to religious leaders. Really, I wanted to make sure to highlight the point that there's a variety of people that you turn to when they need support. It can't always be professional help. We certainly want to build up professional programs as much as we can, but sometimes it's people in their lives that make a difference. I also want to say that a low percentage here isn't a scorecard for who is more important than others. For a coach, for a kid, that coach might be their one trusted adult in their life. So each one of those is important, and we need to lift up all of those as best we can. Next slide, please. So we're going to really dig into the impact of connections, engagement, and hope. This is really kind of the root of the solution, not only for mental health, but substance use, for other problem areas: delinquency, teenage pregnancy, school dropout. And so when we do these things and we make sure they're in place in the community, it provides benefits simultaneously. And that goes for programs, services, and non-professional work as well. Next slide. And I will try to move through these pretty quickly. I'm not going to sit here and read. just want to point out that I had mentioned the 4 domains, youth, peers, family, school, and community. And so there are protective factors, things that we know offset risks for substance use and poor mental health. And some of these are really basic things that you can do in your everyday life. So eat dinner together as a family, doing fun things together as a family. In the community sector, talking to neighbors, being involved in activity clubs, things like the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. But the point at the bottom, that connection to one healthy adult can make a difference, is the one takeaway I really want people to know. Next slide, please. And so with our Healthy Youth Survey data, what we did is we've correlated some of these protective factors. Now, I know there's a lot going on this slide, so even if you want to close your eyes and just kind of listen to what I have to say about it, I've broken this into those 4 domains, so you can see the dotted lines. So it really follows that youth, family, school, community. And so really simply looking at 10th grade depression, those students that reported that they eat dinner with their family, 38% reported less depression. For those who reported being able to do fun things with their parents, 31% less reported depression. Feeling safe at school, 22% less reported depression. And simple things like talking to your neighbor, 27% less reported depression. So some of these are really basic things. Some of them are accomplished through some of our programming as well. Next slide, please. Similar slide, but looking at contemplation of suicide. So again, really basic things, eating dinner with your family. Some of these are just opportunities to have conversations, engage, and provide support. Again, could talk to neighborhood adults. I live in a cul-de-sac and there's a lot of families and a lot of kids. So I always think about this data in my own personal life and how do I interact with the young people that are in my own neighborhood. And I think before we move on, I will cover a few more things around positive childhood experiences and also some hope science data. But Lindsay, I'm hoping that you can jump in and talk about when the rubber meets the road with the schools and some of the work that you're doing, what this looks like for protective factors.
Yeah. And just to introduce myself, my name is Lindsay Anderson. I don't know if you guys can see me or not, but I am the child and family mental health counselor at the Nooksack Valley School District, and I work with our K-5 families. And similar to Joe, I'm also a parent of 2 youth in the Bellingham School District in middle school and in high school. And I just want to touch on some of the protective factors that I'm seeing in our local school community and just in our community as a whole. When I think about working in the public school, we try to think of our school system in a triangle and with 3 tiers. So the bottom tier is, what is the universal thing that we are doing for all students that is going to help them thrive and grow and learn and belong? And then what are we going to do for some of the students? And then what are we going to do for, you know, the intervention for our most impacted students? And when I think about my role prior to the pandemic and then after the pandemic, even before the pandemic, it felt like there wasn't enough therapists to fill the need. And we really had to start thinking about how can we meet our students and our community and our schools at the tier 1 level. And so in our district, we are doing that through kind of a whole child approach that really focuses on the importance of relationships. I can't speak enough to that slide that Joe just shared, looking at who youth turn to in times of need and how what the variety of that was. And I think back to my own experience as a teenager and as a young person, having those protective adults in my life when I couldn't go to my parents or we had outstanding needs made a world of difference. And I think specifically to the kids that I work with who a lot of times struggle to find belonging and engagement at school, knowing that they have someone at school, whether that be me as a therapist, whether that be a mentor, whether that be a teacher or a coach that not only knows them, but makes them feel known is a huge, huge, huge protective factor. And then in addition to that, we really are thinking a lot about what are the integrated systems of support? Like what are the needs, especially in a rural community, that we can fill in by hiring even onto our school staff. So having mental health therapists, which many of our county schools do have, partnering with community mental health agencies, having mentoring programs, as well as drug and alcohol prevention specialists, family outreach coordinators, and also just working closely with our Hispanic and Latinx communities and our tribal communities. Just within the school setting, just to speak to every day in our schools, kids are coming together and having circles around just getting to know each other and building community, as well as getting an opportunity to practice social emotional learning competencies, both in explicit ways and also just in how the teachers and the administrators structure the school day. And so when we really focus on that at the tier 1 level, we can really support an environment that helps all of our kids so that we have more capacity to help kids that have greater needs. And so that's where my role comes in a little bit, with seeing kids one-on-one and working with families through therapy and other interventions. So I will turn it back over to Joe to speak a little bit more on positive childhood experiences, because that's a very important piece of this conversation.
Thanks. Next slide. And so we talked about protective factors, and I'll go through this a little quick because I know the materials will be made available, and we also want to make sure we get to Christy and then back to Lindsay as well. Positive childhood experiences. I just want to point to the quote. Studies on positive childhood development and flourishing point out that the absence of negative health is not the same as positive health. And so there's a list here. Again, a lot of these are about bonding and attachment and connections. So I won't read through them, but next slide, please. Do want to highlight some of the benefits of that as well. So these, when kids have more of these positive childhood experiences, they do much better in terms of mental health. Those with 6 to 7 of these PCEs, as they refer to them, had 72% less poor mental health days. They were also 3.5 times likely to report getting the social emotional support they needed as adults. So that long-term benefit is really important. And here's the thing is, even among those with 0 adverse childhood experiences, individuals that reported 6 to 7 of these PCEs got the social emotional support they needed twice as much as those with fewer positive childhood experiences. So it's not just enough to prevent ACEs, we actually need to build something in its place. Next slide, please. And Hope Science really follows these 2 other frameworks that we use. And I'll just read the important one, which is hope is the belief that your future can be better than your past, and you play a role in making it so. Also, hope is measurable, teachable. And next slide, please. And this is actually something that we do measure, and we collect in the Health Use Survey every 2 years. So we were able to look at 8th grade, the impact of hope on depression. So you're looking at the scale here. The blue bar is no low hope, all the way to highly hopeful. So you can see that the rates of reported depression really just kind of plummet among those with highly hopeful. So part of our work in the prevention field is to squeeze that balloon, create more hope so that we can see those rates of depression drop. Next slide, please. And we see the same thing for substance use. So this is just looking at 8th grade marijuana use and the impact on hope. So looking at the difference from no and low hope to slightly hopeful can make a dramatic impact. So again, we just want to build hope where we can. Building hope, it's all about creating pathways, identifying goals, and providing motivation. So the relationships to address trusted adults are really important for that. And I think that is the last slide. I'm gonna, as I mentioned, I'm gonna make sure that I put any links and some other resources into the chat box. We'll make sure that they're all available. I also want to just reference really quick, Real Whatcom Families. If you type that in, it's whatcomfamilies.org. Has a number of activities that you can do in terms of parenting to really support your kids. Not just eating dinner together, but how to set boundaries, getting to know your neighbors, all those things. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And with that, I think we will go ahead and throw it over to Christy. Christy Sletty is the Executive Director of the Whatcom Family Community Network. She's also tied to several coalitions that you can see there, as well as a parent and just an amazing person to have in the field. So, Christy.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm humbled to be able to speak on this topic. I'm the executive director of the Whatcom Family and Community Network. I've been in this role in the community for about 6 years as of December. Been in Whatcom County for about 34 years of my life. I am honored to have been a parent to 2 biological children, one of which is now a legal adult, not still quite an adult in my eyes, my baby boy who's 18. I have a sophomore in the Mount Baker School District. And then I have also co-parented, helped raise my 31-year-old niece, who is now parenting a 6-year-old and living still on my property. Of the 4 children that I have the honor to impact on a daily basis, 3 of the 4 of them walk this world working to manage very hard mental health issues. So this is a lived experience and very close to me personally. We see how it plays out in a family with education and privilege and access to and knowledge of a lot of the resources, and still there is daily struggle. So Whatcom Family and Community Network is the home to 2 youth substance use and mental health promotion coalitions. So coupled together, we're talking about youth behavioral health, and we work with hundreds of organizations in Whatcom County that care about youth and their behavioral health and mental health. And at the center of our work around youth mental health is our Mad Hope program, which is youth inspired. It was started over 10 years ago by young people in the Bellingham School District who implored adults to help them figure out a response to the loss and the grief they were feeling over the loss of their peers. And so this community did come around and create a curriculum that is shown now in middle and high schools. And currently we're serving all 8 school districts and then a variety of community programs. And I will just say that at this point in the year, we have more requests than we can fill with the staffing we have. So there is high demand. We're seeing a big change in how people are wanting to access this information. The Mad Hope program is very successful because it's based on peer-to-peer education and youth engagement. Youth want and need efficacy in addressing the issues that they're facing. They have a lot of powerful lived experience. They want adults in their lives to understand what they're going through, and that their generation is facing challenges that people in my generation and the generations before me didn't face. Of course, each generation has its own protective factors and their own risks, but our young people today are really asking for us to hear what they have to say. And we're working through a trusted adult campaign to try to elevate their voice and get people to hear them. So that's a little bit about our organization. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So the reason that we are doing this work is that because before COVID, we were seeing increasing rates across time of youth anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking and action. And so when we are looking at how we plan strategy, we always look to the data and what the data is telling us. And there are significant numbers of young people from 8th grade through 10th or through 12th grade who are experiencing suicidal thinking and considering dying by suicide. 24% in 2018 had in the Healthy Youth Survey data disclosed this. And 38% of Whatcom County 10th graders, again, prior to COVID, were reporting feeling seriously depressed in the past 30 days. And most of them feel like 89% are saying that it takes bravery and courage to seek the mental health they need, that it's really a push for them to kind of break through the stigma that society holds around this. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. And the other impetus for our work is that we really do want to acknowledge that there is health disparity in this area of the field, that we see that our young people who are identifying in the LGBTQ2IA area, although the data doesn't focus for us on the non-binary and trans students, it really just hits the LGBTQ population. That's what we have data on. But we know from our lived experience and working with our partners in coalition that all of our young people who are in this community really are longing for acceptance and understanding and belonging. And that starts in their families of origin. Very many young people who are identifying and coming out and sharing their identity are not finding safety in their homes, safety amongst their peer groups, safety in the churches where they do hold religious and spiritual beliefs. They are longing for us to accept and love them despite their identity. The same is true for many populations that we would call individuals of color who identify, or we identify them as people of color. We see this in the Native American community, our Hispanic Latino communities, and others. So we're doing this work because we understand there is significant disparity and there's a specific significant need. And COVID has really exacerbated this issue. And at the point where we talk about exacerbation of the issue, we really want to start to talk about the adults who are serving youth as well as the youth themselves. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So just want to acknowledge that Washington State Department of Health, the Healthcare Authority, shared with us that they anticipate that 3 to 4 million Washingtonians will likely experience clinically significant behavioral health symptoms across this year due to COVID impact. They're looking at depression, anxiety, and that acute stress, that dysregulation will be the most common, and that adolescents, teens, young adults, and older adults are going to need extra support. And that's really challenging when the adults themselves are struggling with so much. Just sat with a 17-year-old this week who said, right now, I don't have any adult support in my home, too many things going on. One of the parents that is there basically said, I got so much going on in my own life, I just can't be there for you in this right now. And just really, recognizing that the adult supports, those protective factors, those positive childhood experiences are so important right now. And so adult regulation and finding our way through this adversity as adults to support our kids is really critical. We do recognize that substance use related challenges are expected to continue. That is among the adults in our community as well as youth. And there's just a lot to that around adverse childhood experiences and what kids are experiencing and what's being modeled in homes. And then we also recognize pandemic apathy will both drive acting out and acting in. And the acting out is a lot of what we're seeing in the disunity and kind of caustic conversation, pretending like the pandemic no longer applies, refusing to comply with regulations, and trying to act in a business as usual, even when everyone knows things are not usual. And kids are such, they really sense and pick up on these areas where there's not alignment in the environment we're living in and how adults are acting and responding to them. And then acting in is just that sense of like giving up, like that hopelessness and the withdrawal and the isolation. And what we're really wanting to elevate is this idea of a community culture shift towards self-compassion and compassion to others that starts with our own emotional regulation as adults. And so then we can co-regulate with one another and with the children that we're touching. We really feel like that's a healing path toward the community trauma of COVID that we're all experiencing, as well as any of the trauma that comes from our backgrounds. Next slide, please. So there are models that are used for looking at human behavior in reaction to disasters. Organizations like the American Red Cross and others use a model like this to just show what they anticipate human response will be when we're aware that a disaster is coming, we're expecting it, it happens, and like how we respond. So basically, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but a couple of things I'd just like to say is that with the way that COVID has been a shared community trauma for us, and there's been multiple waves, right? Just want to note that as multiple waves, like when you look down along the bottom line and you get to the point where it says 15 and you look up, each wave, the lows get lower and the highs get lower. And there is this wearing out of people to kind of bounce forward through the trauma or the disaster. And we are now, almost approaching 2 years, 18, 19 months into the shared community trauma. And people are feeling tired and burned out and fatigued. And our children are feeling the same way and not having the resilience of adults around them, that we're all tired and kind of fatigued together. Next slide. So I do just want to, in our work, everything we do, we try to make it trauma informed and understanding what the impact of how we hold stress in our bodies. And that if you are an individual that has a childhood trauma in your background, adult trauma, that the primary COVID impacts are layered upon that. There's a cascading effect of the stress that we can feel. And so just recognizing that as we continue on through this, our bodies are holding a variety of stress and energy that we are not metabolizing. We're not necessarily out talking with people, being able to get those really healing hugs and going for, a whole lot of not going to gym class or to the gyms and seeing each other as much and working out. We're not necessarily just moving as much. We have a lot more screen time. So that energy that is trapped in our bodies can translate into anxiety. And for someone who is clinically then experiencing, depression or has other factors around mental health in their lives, that anxiety can exacerbate those things that are already part of either their DNA or their lived experience in terms of trauma. So there's just this cascading effect of what already we're living with trauma, what's being held in our body, how we move through that during COVID. And then just looking at the environment and the safety we feel psychologically and physically around, are we getting enough food into the homes, right? What is the political ideologies that are impacting our decision-making in homes and our ability to communicate and love one another well in community? What is the educational feel in the classroom? Things like that. So it's just a cascading impact of the trauma that we may be holding. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And in that, we're feeling, like I said before, this burnout, compassion fatigue. And then there's a sense of moral injury that is really important. We hear a lot of adults in social services, in education, verbally talking about the moral injury they're feeling. They want to do so much more, and they have less life energy to give to it. They're trying to manage their own home lives, their own families, go to work, show up for kids, and it's an overwhelming feeling. So in general, amongst kids and those supporting kids, we're feeling just this general fatigue, exhaustion, and overwhelm. Next slide, please. So the psychological distress shows up in a variety of ways. And in this conversation, we always want to balance that hope with concern. And right now I recognize I'm kind of rooting us in some of the concerns, but knowing that we do live in an abundant community where there are a lot of supports, and we're still finding it very difficult for people to find the supports that they need. And sometimes the supports are not ample enough to cover all the need. Just want to say that. And as we talk about the psychological distress of young people currently who are under the age of 18, we do see that there has been improvement since 2019, the start of the pandemic, to today. At least in the last few weeks, we've seen decreased psychological distress. However, even with that said, as of September, 45%, which was the highest rate of folks feeling frequent symptoms of anxiety, were respondents in 18, 19 years old. So our young adults who are coming just into their adulthood and having to figure out, what do I do with my life? Where am I going to go? Am I going to go to school? All those things. And what we're hearing from kids in high school is that the pressure of that, what their life will look like, is a lot. There's just a lot of pressure. And that there has been recent statistical warnings issued for suicidal ideation for those aged 5 to 17. Next slide. And so the common responses are that these behaviors show up in homes, in schools, in the places where kids are showing up in community. And with just recognizing that this is common human behavior, this is expected. When trauma shows up and adversity is faced, people are dysregulated, and regardless of our age. And so it creates a situation where it's very difficult for young people to learn and respond in a way that society really embraces and feels great about. Our young people, it feels overwhelming. And so I did want to bring Lindsay back into the conversation to just talk a little bit about what that's feeling like in the classrooms, in school buildings, and what she's hearing amongst the community.
Thank you, Christy. And I just want to say, like, your slides on just the ongoing burnout and fatigue, I feel really seen in that. And I imagine a lot of us in this Zoom can relate to the ongoing effects of just uncertainty and the stress of caring for others. So what this is looking like in our schools, I'm going to kind of share a little analogy that we talk about with our elementary school kids, and that is this idea of the brain in the palm of our hand. And so if you think about your brain in 3 parts, we have our brainstem that connects to our vagus nerve, that connects to all of our living systems, our breathing, our eating, our thinking, every single system of our body, to our limbic system, which connects with our memory and our emotions and kind of our alarm system in our brain, and then our upstairs brain, which is our prefrontal cortex, which helps us think and reason and make friends and all these things that enrich our lives. When we are feeling stressed and triggered, we talk about with our kids that our lid flips and we go into fight, flight, freeze, people-pleasing fawn mode, all these different trauma responses. And what we're seeing in not just the Nooksack School District, but across our county, that we're seeing a heightened response of kids being very dysregulated with flipped lids within the school setting. And that is turning into kids leaving the classroom, missing school, just feeling like they abruptly just can't deal. And that isn't happening, constantly. There are still a lot of really wonderful things that are happening within our youth. But I think these are some common things to look for when you are wondering, does my youth or does this student or kid on my team need some help? So some of the common responses might be emotional. They might be increased irritability, easily frustrated, just being a little more sensitive than normal. Some of our cognitive experiences, like, are we able to concentrate? Are we having trouble focusing? Kind of those types of things. Like, can we stay organized? You know, I'm going into classrooms every day and looking at all of these different behaviors and symptoms as not just because the child doesn't want to learn and belong, it's that their capacity to manage their stress is severely impacted. And kind of with that, when we think about our window of stress tolerance before COVID, maybe it was a little bit wider. Now for all of us, I would say myself included, it's a little more narrower. And just like Christy said, as the waves come and go, those highs and lows can increase. So also just paying attention to, you know, when kids, I was actually just in the office a little bit ago, kids coming in with headaches and stomach aches and sore throats, is when they're starting to report more of that, not just possibly a COVID case, but also just maybe not knowing how to say what they're actually experiencing. And then also just seeing an increase in aggression, substance use, shutting down, and isolation. And I will speak a little bit to just what we are also noticing across the board, that there is an increase in suicidal ideation and self-harm ideation, particularly in the LGBTQ plus community. And I think as well, there is an increase in students just being more aware of when they need help, which is actually a positive piece. And just kind of finally thinking about, you know, we all come in with lots of different capacities and resources to face these challenges. And we talk a lot in our district and in our community about resilience and hope. And one of the things I really appreciate about doing work with the prevention coalitions and with other service providers in this community is that we are looking at not just the individual students, but that we're looking at the system as a whole. And I was talking with a colleague the other day about resilience and talking about how it feels sort of unfair to like have this kind of, everybody is expected to have this same amount of resilience when a lot of people have a lot more privilege and ability to be resilient just because of the resources that they have. So how can we tap into the systemic inequities and just bigger systems at play so that all kids can thrive and grow and face an ongoing challenge such as what we are currently facing. So I will turn it back over to Christy.
Thank you so much. Boy, I wish we had hours more to talk. There's so much to pack in here. Go ahead and change slides. Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing that. So, you know, there is good news, and here's where we get to talk about some of the hope. And I guess I'd just like to clarify that when we talk about hope from a coalition and a prevention standpoint, we are, as Joe said, it's measurable. Hope is about setting goals, and it's about finding pathways to achieve those goals, and about having the willpower to choose a pathway and walk it. And, you know, the typical long-term response to disasters is resilience, but understanding and unpacking what resilience is for yourself as an individual, for what it means for a community. There's work and understanding to be done in that. But resilience is something that can be intentionally taught and practiced and developed for people across all age groups. We want to really focus on social connection. And we understand that in a time of COVID, social connecting has been one of those things where we have this physical distancing. We're not supposed to be hugging on everybody or getting too close. And so it has been challenging, but reaching out and using whatever communication strategies we have is critical. Reach out to the kids in your life, reach out to the adults who are parenting or you know are struggling with mental health that have impact in kids' lives, and just show up for one another, even in your own situation, right? Many of us here likely understand what it is to be dealing with mental health issues, and we can be there for one another. We really want to reorient and develop a sense of purpose now during this time, and try to raise ourselves out of that sense of hopelessness. And becoming adaptive and psychologically flexible is really helpful in that. And not everyone has that as a skill, especially if they have a deep trauma history. before this. And so learning self-regulation and co-regulation skills is very important, and really understanding hope science. And we're hoping to bring all this into our communities, bandwidth of knowledge that when we say the word hope, oh, everybody goes, oh, we know what that is. Oh, self-regulation, yeah, we know what that is. It's not woo-woo types of things. It's like really tangible, hopeful, concrete skills. Next slide. And there are things that we can do. The MEDIC model is really an individual plan for what you can do to start modeling resilience as a priority. Focus on engaging, just reach out to the people that are around you, developing your own healthy boundaries around your time, your work, identifying just those small workable pieces of a self-care plan, breathing, like deeply breathing every day, ending work at 5, right? Thinking about how much pressure you put on the children in your life to do their homework, to have a job, to do well in sports. Just identify some of those things and have a better plan for yourself, and change expectations about performance and success for yourself, those around you, and especially for kids. Give some grace and space and more time for rest. Next slide. And in the community, ultimately, we want every adult just to know what to say, what to do, and where to go for help when a child discloses that they are in mental distress. And there's so many different ways to connect. And it's just really reaching out with love. What we hear kids telling us is that they don't want us as adults to give advice. They want us just to say, I'm here for you. What's going on in your life? How are you feeling? And listen. And parents, those raising kids, need support too. And there's a lot that you can learn here in this community. So there's a list here of places to go and things to learn. Next slide, please. And there are ways to act. And really, the most important thing we can do right now is to practice and model our own self-regulation, learn those skills, and talk about mental well-being. There's still so much stigma, and we really want to stop that and to break through that. Be that trusted adult and learn about what resources exist here, bridge and link to others. And then, of course, volunteer and donate. There's a lot going on here, and we all need extra support right now. Thank you.
Great. Christy, thank you so much. And thanks to Joe and to Lindsay as well. I know we are just right under time. And so I want to make sure we get to just a couple of the questions from attendees, and then remind everybody that we will be sending out resources and any other follow-up information as well. So I want to invite everybody on the panel to come back on screen if you would. That would be great. And these first two, Joe, I know I want to toss these both to you because I think they're in your wheelhouse. So the first one is related to eating disorder data, and just wonder if there are places that you can point folks.
So there is information in the health use survey about eating. I'm not sure that I'm actually the best person. I know Lindsay can chime in here, but I think some of what we see is, I'm just checking my notes here. Yeah, actually, maybe I'll just throw it to Lindsay because I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important question. And I think for me, I'm looking not just at the symptoms of eating disorder, but looking at our culture as a whole in terms of how we privilege and consider different sizes of people, and the ideas around diet culture. And I think there's a lot of things in there that impact our views of eating disorders, but there are some great, Food Psych is a really great podcast and resource that I have learned a lot from. But in terms of the elementary school, I think I would have to defer to my high school and middle school colleagues in that. But at the elementary level, I think just focusing on movement and just feeling good, and just that we all belong and fit is an important piece.
Great, thank you. And then, excuse me, we also had a question about whether this data for Whatcom County can be extrapolated to other, particularly rural parts of the state. And Joe, I wonder if that's maybe also your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Lindsay was just saying too. I think one of the things that we want to do is make sure that parents are having conversations also about eating. I think there's, it's not just social media and bullying that comes with that, but it's, understanding and being media literate as well. I think we're constantly bombarded with images and messaging about how you should look and how that plays into confidence of young people and expectations. So I think that needs to be added to those conversations around substance abuse and other issues of stigma as well. In terms of data, typically what we see areas of concern, let's say in county schools compared to Bellingham, typically if it's a concern in Nooksack, a lot of times it's a concern throughout the county. Same thing, county compared to the state. If we're seeing elevated rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal thinking, those tend to follow the same patterns that the state does. And again, that would be consistent with the state to the nation as well. There are sometimes specific things that might be unique to a geography, but again, I think for the most part, we're seeing a lot of these struggles that Christy and Lindsay talked about being common in all 7 of our school districts. Really nothing unique. And the data really backs that up. And seeing data over the past 20 years in Whatcom County, it's more than norm that things that are bright spots in certain places tend to be bright spots within the county, and struggles tend to be struggles countywide too.
Great, thank you. Well, I never thought I'd say this after having spent so much time on Zoom, but I wish we had scheduled this for 2 hours. There is clearly much more to learn, much more to query you all about. So thank you all for joining us. We are going to make sure that we send out some follow-up information. And we did get a question about whether the link is shareable to folks who did not register. Absolutely, please feel free to do that. And I'm going to hand it over to Francisco.
And well, again, thank you. Such great information and data that we have. And we're so pleased that we have such committed leaders who are helping to illuminate what each of us can do and options for responding as a community. So I hope everyone will join me in thanking our panelists, Maury, Joe, Christy, and Lindsay. And then thank you all for attending. It's really important to know that we have a community that cares deeply about this issue. Last comment, the next Spotlight briefing will be on November the 19th, focus on domestic violence. So I hope you can join us at that time. So thanks everybody. And again, thanks to our wonderful panel participants for this great session. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.